Hello and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm John Harrington, the editor of PRWeek UK, and apologies to any listeners who are dieting for January. This week's episode is all about food. The government's so-called junk food ad ban via the high fat, sugar and salt regulations came in on the 5th of January. This bans any online advertising of designated unhealthy foods and limits TV ads to after 9 p.m. We'll look at what it means for PR and discuss communications around food, health and sustainability more generally with our special guests. Mallika Basu has a background in comms and food. She's a board advisor at Blurred and author of the new book, which has with us, In Good Taste, What Shapes What We Eat and Drink and Why It Matters. Welcome, Mallika. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you for coming along. Our other guest is Harvey Choat, a managing director of food and drink PR agency Nexus. Welcome, Harvey. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you, John. Yeah, very kind to have me, yeah.
No problem at all. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Evie Barrett. Evie is PRWeek's deputy news editor and has written about the HFSS regulations several times. So great to have you on as well, Evie. Thank you.
Hi, John.
Let's get straight into it. So as I said, HFSS, the ad bans have officially been in place for just over a week. Have you noticed any immediate day-to-day differences so far, would you say? Have clients said anything in particular? And how do you think brands have reacted, if at all?
So it's interesting because we have a range of clients from products you would consider healthier, eggs, for example, down to chocolate brands. And there's definitely more fear and hesitance at the latter end, so in the sort of chocolate indulgence space. So from the chocolate indulgence space, what we've seen is almost like a stop of marketing, a stop of spend, because there is that misunderstanding and nervousness about getting things wrong.
Interesting. Mallika, have you noticed anything in particular?
Not specifically, but there have been quite high-profile exposés of budgets being reallocated and repurposed. So the Food Foundation, for instance, which looks at affordability and health and sustainability, did a report quite recently. It's called the State of the Nation report. And in there, they exposed food brands who were simply reallocating their budget. So I think transparency is an issue. I think where fast moves are being made without due consideration or thought, they're definitely making the headlines.
Interesting. And I suppose the fact that the budget is being reallocated, maybe that's a good thing for our side of the marketing communications world, we would hope.
Well, absolutely. I think the challenge here is how they're being allocated and whether these are just knee-jerk reactions or whether they're centered and rooted in a broader understanding of why these regulations are coming in. So it's easy to see HFSS as, just a bit of a pain, really long time coming. There are lots of loopholes that we can get around, but in fact, it provides a much bigger opportunity to think differently.
Harvey, how would you say clients' kind of attitudes towards these changes have been? Are they quite welcoming of it, and sort of how are they long-term planning for it?
Yeah, I think most people with a stomach, right, recognize that, these are changes that need to happen, and there are crises across health and how people live. I think clients, they want clarity. That's a big thing. And I think there's the lack of clarity in some areas. But I think also having to look at like the 4 Ps, right? That is the challenge for businesses. A lot of MPD is done without the communication team involved. A lot of those things happen. So I think hopefully this is an opportunity for businesses to go actually marketing from a basic level, product, price, place, promotion, need to work closer together. And that's going to make lives easier because MPD is similar to banking, right? Regulation comes in and it means the business needs to work more closely together. So I think that's a really great thing, a great opportunity for food businesses to look at.
Great. And I guess going on from this, do you feel there's a real opportunity here for food companies to be really creative when it comes to what they do, when it comes to how they promote their products?
I mean, I would say creativity's always got to be at the heart of any brand strategy, really, and creativity can be pigeonholed, it's got to be out there crazy. It doesn't have to be, it can just be in a MPD and how they've done that. I think there's a challenge for businesses on creativity sort of generally in bringing those 4 Ps together. From a social and PR perspective, I think a lot of businesses still run those things separately. A lot of food companies still have multiple agencies looking at multiple things, and social becomes a paid exercise, whereas social really is a PR exercise. And I think that is the opportunity. Frank PR recently launched their own social agency. Interesting move, because you would go, well, let's bring these things together. They recognize that clients are still thinking separately. But I think if brands can start to recognize that if they bring those things together, there are much lower reputational risks, right? You need the PR lens on social not to get in trouble. basically. And that is something that food businesses, all businesses, need to realise, I think.
Interesting. Mallika, what do you think? Do you think food businesses are using PR enough and being as creative as they could be? Have you got any particular thoughts on that?
I think creativity needs to mean something completely different within the environment we're in. So if you look at why these things are happening, it's because our health is shot. It's because the ingredients that go into making junk food products obliterate the planet. So the climate and environment impact is absolutely dreadful. And actually, creativity shouldn't be synonymous with gaming the system. And that's been a problem. There are loopholes, and companies have tried to dodge those loopholes or find ways to communicate their products in ways that get around, less healthy foods and all of that. And certainly from my experience in the industry, you will have a lot of retailers and good food brands. They've been wanting legislation because you get first mover advantage. You also get first mover disadvantage. So when you try and be good, you actually stick your head above the parapet. You get tall poppy syndrome, and people are like, nah, we don't want that healthy nonsense. We'll go somewhere else. And it's been a thing for supermarkets, for instance, where, systems and promotions that nudge people towards healthier choices have just backfired. So, we need to take a slightly broader view. To your point, Harvey, about where PR and comms comes in, I think that's a really valid point, because you can almost see the food industry as upstream and downstream. So if you like, we're the downstream, PR, comms, retail, we're at the downstream of it, but the upstream is basically NPD, it's supply chain, it's ingredients sourcing, it's all of those things, all those things come together, and they have to work very cleverly together. I think that's where creativity comes from and should mean going forward.
It becomes less about, here's this product, you should go and buy it, and more about kind of building brand loyalty and that branding exercise. And I suppose social has played such an important part in that in sort of years and months gone by. How do you think the rules will impact social media and influencer marketing?
Well, seeing as I create a lot of content on my food side of things, I feel like I should really try and answer this. It's definitely become more of a quality than quantity play. And I think Joe Wick spoke quite well about this on a recent podcast you guys did, where it is taking a lot more effort to build your own brand on social media and to actually manage your community. So social media isn't very social at all anymore. It's digital entertainment. And so everyone is competing for attention, and it's like having a little mini show. So we've gone from just let's get an activation, let's get as many hits, as many likes, as much visibility and reach, to actually something much more considered. So I think we're going to see a move towards more of that sort of thinking, where do these influencers actually understand what we're trying to do? Do they align with the brand values? Are they willing to talk about the product in a way that feels authentic and joined up? And I think that's a big opportunity. I mean, I don't know, Harvey, do you think that's a big opportunity?
Yeah, I think it's a big opportunity. And influencer work is interesting because probably 2018 to 2020, it was get them some product and let them talk about it. And we've moved into the phase of social media being actually a trusted channel for a big swathe of consumers, particularly younger consumers. And they're smart, right? They know when something doesn't feel genuine or something doesn't feel authentic. So you have to navigate that. The kind of risk of influencer marketing is that actually brands can now get in trouble for it. So if they are using influencers to say the wrong thing, particularly if they're paid arrangements and there isn't that PR lens on reputation, actually you kind of fall into the space of what I think some people in the industry call de-influencing or anti-influencing.
Yes.
The Eddie Abus of this world, Sunna Van Kampens, where they are pulling out products on supermarket shelves and saying, don't buy this. And I think that is the big risk. It's already started, but for food brands who aren't thinking smartly there, and that goes back to NPD, right? Because you can't get the product off the shelf you've already put on the shelf and have been saying it's good, and then someone with a massive following comes and says this is rubbish, don't buy it. That's a commercial D-list risk, like right there, and brands need to act.
Eddie Abu is a brilliant example, actually. So I interviewed him for something, and he got sent a whole load of canned tuna, which was, of course, great, healthy, lean protein, blah, 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 all the good stuff. Except the company also sent him a whole load of flavored tuna products. And what is he against? Ultra processed food, artificial colors, flavoring. And so he basically did this post and went for that jugular to say, thanks for your amazing tuna products, but what's all this, stuff you also sent me? And it was like a car crash in slow motion. So definitely much more thoughtful would be the way forward.
Yeah, it's a lesson on doing your research with who you work with, because I think some people kind of search and someone pops up, yeah, they look great, let's send it to them, and not actually know what their values are.
It's kind of amazing to me that something like that gets through. Is it a case of who signs this off? I just don't really understand in this day and age how those mistakes can be
what
made.
What's probably happening there, and it's a really good example of it, is a social agency being tasked on KPIs. We need to get X million hits and X million and not having the PR lens, or a case of a PR agency doing it and not understanding the kind of social implications and virality of it. And I think agencies that will succeed now get both bits, social and PR. And it's going to be interesting influencer work with food and drink, because it is limiting what brands can do.
Okay, so given that paid social will be under much more scrutiny than own social channels under HFSS, how can brands drive organic engagement, would you say?
Well, number one, for me, if I was sitting there as a CMO of a brand now, I would be going, what's our long-term nutritional and CSR strategy? Because you need a yin to the yang, right? Even if you're a chocolate bar, I would be going, how do we creatively activate that? Do you know what I mean? And that allows you to have a kind of, I would say, a selflessly relevant conversation with consumers and build some purpose. And thirdly is having credible nutritional research. So not everybody can do that, right? We got a lovely piece of cake here. If you're the cake company, it's difficult to do that, but if you're not, and you're in a different space, the Trips of this world, other brands like that, at the moment, a lot of them are working off air. They're working off pretty spurious nutritional research. They don't really have a nutritional strategy. And without that, they've got no defense and kind of no proactive foot, because they're going to come in for criticism, whether it's by an influencer or press. And that can not just tarnish the brand, it tarnishes the category, right? And that then becomes plant-based. Great example. We worked a lot on plant-based from 18 to 21, 22, and they forgot they were food, basically. All those brands forgot they were food, and they all talked about climate change, and that worked in 18, 20, because the pink boats were out and everyone was talking about that sort of thing. But they've got to remember their food, and if you work in what I would say sort of classic food territories, whether it's vegetables, meat, eggs, there's loads of research about what these products can do or can't do. The more processed foods, much less investment in research. That's a problem.
Following on quite nicely from that, looking at the wider issue of food and comms, what do you think brands are really getting wrong at the moment when they're talking about healthy foods? Mallika?
I think we're missing some really decent storytelling, to be honest. Like, if you look at the latest regulations, those changes aren't going to happen overnight. Like for a cake brand to suddenly become healthier or more wholesome, it's actually quite an off-putting message, because people, shoppers, food lovers, what are they sort of motivated by? Price, taste, availability, affordability, that's the sort of thing. So authentic storytelling, which is such a cliche. And the challenge we have is we see healthy as almost like a premium thing. We put it into a niche. We put things like organic, healthy, wholesome in a niche, whereas that should be the normal. What we should be doing is changing the way we think about that's the good stuff, and here's the odd treat you can have. I mean, one of the things I say to mixed response in the food world is that the problem isn't ultra-processed foods. The problem is the percentage of ultra-processed foods we have in our diets. I mean, a killer protein bar doesn't actually exist, for good reason. But, I, despite the fact that I bake my own bread, brew my own water cafe, do all the good stuff, even make my own butter sometimes, like I am not making my own protein bars to carry around on trains. We still need those products. The thing is, the main products need to be healthy, and you might reach for a bit of chocolate-laden, whatever, cheap chocolate-laden junk if you fancy it. And I think that the challenge is doing that, is flipping the script going forward and working towards a bit more of a new normal. Because I'll tell you what, it's not going to get any easier. I mean, the government, politicians are already talking about tightening the nutrition profile, like the modeling profile, which means more products are going to go under the ban.
That's really interesting, because if you look at the reality of changing culture, right, and anyone in advertising or PR will say this, you'll go, well, it's follow the money, basically. And the amount of money spent on what we'd say HFSS food or junk food is far outweighs the money spent on vegetables, fruit, all those kind of things. And Veganuary is a great example. We're sitting in the middle of Veganuary now, which is a campaign that has probably lost a bit of its energy, we would say, over the last few years. But why aren't supermarkets encouraging us to eat more vegetables during Veganuary? I mean, they're all encouraging us to eat burgers that have been mixed together. And I think the balance here, as you say, is the important thing. You know, you could keep media spend and PR allocate as it is for HFSS foods. But if you were to bring up the same level of spend for what you'd say whole foods, that would balance the argument pretty quickly from a consumer's intake of media. But where does that money come from? Right? Because that grower industry in the fruit and veg sector is highly segmented. They've got some generic groups. They can't get themselves together to do anything. You've got AHDB, who can't really do much from what I've seen at the moment. That's the problem. So you could spend 500 million a year on HFSS food advertising, as far as I'm concerned, but if that has to be matched with healthy food
100%,
spend,
100%.
that's the problem.
And Veganuary 100% is falling off the radar a bit. But what we're seeing a lot of energy in, Harvey, is the plant, basically alternative protein. So the plant-based category is definitely growing. So there's an organization called Plant Futures, which is galvanizing plant-based businesses. And it's a really broad category. You think it's got like beans, and then it's got basically fake meat burgers. But they've just done something called, I think, Meat Free, Meat Easy, which is a broader campaign. But that then covers not just healthy food. It's called Healthy Sustainable Diets. So it's the personal health and planetary health piece joined up. And I think that's where the momentum is. And we need to get behind that because it feels more joined up and more accurately a reflection of what we need going forward.
Do you think the new regulations have had an impact on kind of the downfall of Veganuary, as it were, or was it, I guess, people wanting to make changes throughout the year and that kind of thing, seeing it as less of a novelty nowadays?
The challenge with Veganuary has been that it became centered around animal welfare and animal cruelty. And the reason for eating more plant-based foods is much broader. It's about personal health and planetary health. And it was beginning to alienate meat lovers. And if we want to see any success of a shift towards healthy, sustainable diets, we need to engage people who love eating meat and cannot disassociate that from the pain that animals feel. So therefore, plant-based feels like a much more accurate reflection. And so a lot of brands have actually pulled back from Veganuary. And Veganuary, yes, if you love animals, you're against animal cruelty, it is a brilliant month to kickstart maybe your commitment or even dip your toe into eating more vegetables, but it has lost some of its luster.
As a vegan, sorry, I know it's such a cliche to say that, but I'm not one. I hope I don't fall into that, normal cliche category of a vegan, but I feel it's relevant in this case. I've definitely known a reduction in lines at supermarkets. I used to go into my local Iceland in Clapham and there'd be a selection of like vegan pizzas and stuff like that. And now I just don't think there are any at all. And it does feel like that sort of happened. I mean, I find it strange that whole movement's PR seems to be so bad, considering it's basically not harming anyone else. And it is, however you look at it, doing better things for animal welfare and the environment and so on. It's just one of those sorts of strange things I can't quite get my head around.
I think you've made some pertinent points there. That campaign has become, but it did last year and has over the last sort of couple of years become isolated around animal welfare, which all the research shows alienates the vast majority of people, because what we really want is people to be eating less meat, not no meat. And I think that's the challenge. And then the UPF wave came at the same time. So you've got, what you would say is ultra-processed foods, and they're being pushed. And I think Plant Futures, Indy Core, right, she's done a great job to pull lots of people together. But that movement of Veganuary really needs to talk about a broader world. And the term plant-based is alienating now as well, dead. But if that category were to go, we are going to partner with fruit and vegetables and talk about eating real fruit and veg and our stuff as well, that's a really inclusive message. It can't get its head around that. And it's a shame, because I remember back in 1890 when we were doing a lot for Meatless Farm, where do we go in the supermarket? We should be next to the meat, great, fantastic. If you really think about it, wouldn't it be great if those products were in the vegetable aisle and it was much more merchandised, all that sort of stuff? So it's a shame, because the Matthew Glover, the guy behind it all a long time ago, and it's a global initiative, did a great job pulling it together, but they just took it the wrong way. And there's still, I mean, I've seen Evie today launch their pork is dead outdoor, and you go, well, I mean, obviously pork is dead. What about vegetables are alive? There's just the mindset's not right.
I certainly think in this country, it was the Greggs sausage roll that really exploded this. And that was very much around telling people that vegan food doesn't have to be boring. It can also be filling and it can be enjoyable. And it's a very different image. The vibe is very different. And it felt like that obviously sparks a lot of conversation, not least with Piers Morgan and his views. But also I think it didn't actually focus on animal welfare. I think you're right. It just focused on something different. Do you think that movement and anyone sort of promoting those kind of products needs to just look at being a bit more creative and maybe, it doesn't have to be so serious as well. I do think the earnestness can be a bit off-putting sometimes.
100%. I mean, why do people eat food? It's pleasure, it's joy. We've forgotten about that. And there's such a disconnect between what motivates people and the way those stories are told, aren't there? I mean, I talk about this a lot, actually, in the food circles. It's like, have we forgotten that food unites us and it brings joy to the table? So, yes, definitely. And, I've been in the audience. I used to be the non-exec director of an egg company, actually. And I was in the audience, and it made for very uncomfortable listening to hear about baby male chicks. And I'm thinking, what this is really, it's not very engaging, is it? Nobody likes to be told what to do, and nobody likes to be shamed into behaving in a certain way. We fundamentally know that as comms people. And so, yeah, vegetables are alive. Let's do it.
Vegetables are alive. And you get their strategies led to a backlash, and that is prevalent now. And interestingly, eggs are the number one protein people go to when they want to reduce meat intake.
Yeah.
So it's
a great product.
Great. I believe so. But there's lots of, different ethics around things. But I think that is the big challenge for that sector. Animal welfare and being ultra processed hitting the shores at the same time.
Here's another thought off the top of my head. In recent years, I've definitely seen supermarkets have more very, very low price deals on vegetables. Like it's really kind of, you look at it compared to the cost of everything else going up. Off the top of my head, it might be like 50p for like a bag of turnips and potatoes or whatever, or broccoli, or similar sorts of things. And yeah, I'm not sure that's really having much effect, because there's this strange thing, isn't it? You're right, Mallika, when you say that like a lot of the time people associate sort of healthy and wholesome with sort of expensive sometimes, but demonstrably that hasn't been the case in a lot of ways. So it just seems strange to me that I'm not sure reducing the price has necessarily had that much of a difference, or maybe I'm wrong.
They haven't. And in fact, it's caused all sorts of other problems, which is mainly that farmers, food producers just don't get paid enough. I feel like we need a whole other podcast on vegetables, to be honest, what sort of comms we would do for them. But, it's a travesty because British farming is under a lot of pressure. I was at 2 farming conferences last week, hearing all about resilience being a huge problem, also pesticides, plastics, glyphosate is the big thing coming up for the sector. And the issue we've got is the farming in this country is struggling, and then we have vegetables and fruits coming from all around the world, often from quite climate vulnerable places. So there are some questions we need to ask, like, yes, they're industries. It means our plates are more exciting. We can have these wonderful global meals, but at what cost? And how does that leave us exposed to risks down the line? So I think parallel to obviously looking at the formulations of products, we also have to think about the image and the value of fundamentally horticulture. So fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes. Beans are having a massive moment. Why don't we see more snacks with beans? I've been eating fava bean crisps instead of actual crisps at events, which are interesting. They're quite nice. But, giving all those other things a new lease of life. I think the product development opportunities are huge.
Okay, so moving on. How bad do you think the problem is of nutrition misinformation online in the age of AI, when obviously mis and disinformation generally are kind of rife?
I mean, I think it's not just a problem that's come about because of AI. I think there's been misinformation or unsubstantiated information, and that goes back to things like Stephen Bartlett a couple of years ago with Huel and those sorts of things. AI can accelerate that, perpetuate it. I think the challenge for consumers, brands, is understanding where they can get good solid information from. So the research that Nexus has done shows that actually the NHS is the most trusted source when it comes to food. Some of that information isn't that helpful, to be honest. And I point to the new US food pyramid, which is very interesting. It's almost turned things on its head. So sources where people can get stuff. Brands need to get better at research, nutritional research on that side of things. But then brands who aren't, healthy food, cake, chocolate, that sort of thing, actually they can start to talk about other things. So, whether it's, social things, bringing people together, whether it's exercise. And this isn't new stuff. I mean, Snickers have been talking about running around from A to B since the beginning of time. But they've got to grab onto something that does something good, or something entertaining. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a genuine problem. And again, it's not AI specific. China's just actually passed regulation which makes it illegal to talk about a subject matter unless you have a professional qualification or degree in that subject. That happened in October, I think, last year. And of course, there are big freedom of speech questions related to that, but it is an attempt to actually, stem some of the tide of misinformation and disinformation. The way it affects brands, I think, and also companies, food companies, is that it really gets in the way of messaging. So if you look at what's happened with this plant-based alt category, alt protein category, they've become synonymous with ultra-processed foods, but there's a huge range in the quality and the nutritional makeup of products within that broader category. So we do have to address some of that if we're serious. And even now, the political climate, we've seen what's happened in Australia with social media for the under 16s. In terms of youth marketing, I think it's going to throw up some significant questions for brands here. I mean, politicians here are now talking about whether they need to replicate that and ban social media for under 16s. So we do need to address it.
What can comms professionals do to counter all these challenges? I mean, whether that's from food brands or PR professionals in the health space, what advice would you give?
I would say, and I use plant-based as an example, you've got to look at something longer term. So there's loads of research about having more vegetable plant days a week actually helps you live longer. There's loads of research on that. Actually, if I have 3 plant days a week, I could live another 5 years. It's about getting hold of things that are substantiated and then following that through and then activating it consistently. And brands have got to do that. A lot of them aren't looking long term, and I think that is a challenge, for them. So that would be my advice. Look long term and find some credible research to build a brand communication and strategy off. Because at the moment, you're probably in quarterly and annual planning still, and that's not good enough in the industry anymore.
I mean, I'm quite excited about new social and digital platforms as well. YouTube is a great example of that. And I think, I still see a lot of very old school comms, where it's the kind of big bang activation. It's very commercially driven. It's tied to sort of, peaks or moments in the year, which it feels a bit old hat sometimes. There's much bigger opportunities for ongoing storytelling that really builds brand loyalty from within. And, the research you were talking about, Harvey, imagine if there was loads of incredible nutrition research and you got some great influencers involved and like presenters, and you could tell those stories even through your people. Every organization will have these incredible people like superstars, and just activating them on YouTube, for instance. YouTube is now the most watched broadcast channel, like over ITV. I think it's second only to the BBC or something at the moment. So, and lots of young people watch it. Young people are back on Reddit. Did you know that?
Reddit's driving AI, right, as well.
I mean,
so there's
incredible.
A lot of,
And so, thinking a little bit differently to what was done before and taking control of the storytelling, I think has to be the way forward.
Sometimes I'm a bit surprised that healthier foods don't get involved in sport promotion and marketing. I mean, I guess this might be a budget thing, that they don't have the money of a Doritos or a Pepsi or whatever it might be. But do you have any thoughts on that? That seems like a way in.
One thing you mentioned, budget is there, and those industries, although they do have kind of generic representation, a lot of them are quite fragmented. So AHDB, which was set up a long time ago, potentially hasn't delivered what it could have done. And I don't think through the fault of anybody. It's just because they are complex industries with lots of different voices. Delivering a campaign is tough. But I think also access to schools, access to that kind of youth environment hasn't been made easy for kind of healthier alternatives, and that should be there. And I mean, research we've shown that I think it's over 65% of British consumers would support the government funding advertising of healthier foods. The government probably isn't supporting enough. And I think if there's one thing policymakers could do is look to address the parity of budgets and support those sectors to unlock spend, because the more we see, the more we buy. That's the business, right?
Definitely.
Moving back to HFSS, where do you think we'll be with these regulations a year from now? Do you think they'll succeed, or will the PR industry just get smarter at finding loopholes?
The smarter we try and be, and the more we try and game the system, the harder it's going to get. This is only going one way. There's been a lot of chat in the industry among stakeholders, civil society organizations about, this is not a political move, right? The nation's health is not a political football. It is something we need to take control of, like now and in the future. Whatever party comes in, this has got to be a priority. So we know that there was a national strategy by Henry Dimbleby. It got pushed into the Long Park. Now we have the good food cycle. There's a lot of moves being made. The more we try and game the system and avoid the real elephant in the room, which is that change needs to happen from within the sector. Comms experts need to be at the heart of communicating those changes in a way that is engaging, honest, yes, trustworthy. Then that is where we should be heading. We should not be seeing this as a massive pain in the wrong place. We should be seeing this as a huge opportunity to do things differently and fundamentally rethink what we're eating, what we're snacking on.
It's a really interesting question. You come back to the fundamental nature of where, and I'm sure your book addresses it, but convenience has become really important to all of us. We kind of rarely have the time to make our own food or that sort of thing. And I think that cultural shift is what's needed, right? How can we shift the nation away from convenience, so not having enough money or time to invest in their food, which is ultimately impacts their health, right? And I think that is a bigger question for the nation. Are we all working too much? Are we having enough time? Are we paid enough? That comes to the root of this. The wealthier you get, the more time you've got to sit and make your food, haven't you? I remember when I was a junior, you'd be sticking something in a microwave because you couldn't afford anything else.
You make a very valid point, and I think partly you're seeing things like regenerative and responsibly sourced on packets, and there is a huge gap, which is that a lot of people just don't know what these things mean. Even just explaining, like you might see agroecology or organic, and you don't know the difference. And in fact, the ASA has moved to talk about what those things mean. Is if we make health claims, do people actually understand those health claims? So I definitely have tried to address some of that in the book, because unless we do that, we're not bringing people in on the journey. This is all very esoteric stuff. Like, why would I just munch on a carrot instead of grabbing a really cool, snack bar? It makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, I went on a train recently and I got very cross with the cafe owner for offering me muffins, croissants, and pastries. That's what he offered me for breakfast. I was, no, it's the January detox. I was very huffy with him. And then I went and bought 2 eggs. And it was just 2 eggs on a bit of spinach. And it took all my steel to eat that on a train in front of a guy who looked like he was going to explode with misery. There were no windows open on the train. And I'm like, why don't you put these eggs in a little bit of a sauce or do something clever with them? Make it a bit more appealing to someone who might want to make a better choice.
That's it. And interesting, those snack pot eggs, I think they've become the number 1 seller on the meal deal in Tesco's.
That's amazing, isn't it? You think about that, because that is innovation in a sense, and it's not so alien to us that we don't know what eggs and spinach taste like, but actually just having it in a way that is sort of quite easy to eat. I guess another question might be the use of plastic in something like that, but we could go into that as well, but we probably don't have time. But it is probably a really good example of that, actually. Now I feel slightly conscious that I put a bit of cake in front of you when this podcast started. There's a reason behind that to all the listeners here, which we don't have time to go into, but we do actually have some sort of sweets and cake in front of us, but that's another question. I feel a bit bad about it. But next question.
I mean, what are some of the less obvious impacts of the HFSS regulation? A point that John has raised before, which I think is really interesting, is that we often see a lot of food waste in PR stunts where it's like food artwork or world's largest cream egg and kind of these kind of ideas where obviously the food is more than likely kind of going to waste. What do you think will change that people might not have thought about as much?
I think it's interesting because, we've done lots with food, from toast houses to, the world's biggest dippy egg competition or whatever it was. But I think one thing about being a brand that can engage consumers is being entertaining. Do you know what I mean? And there's always a lens that is, we don't want to be seen to be wasteful. We don't want to be seen to be gluttonous or thoughtless. So I think I would hope that we don't see that stifle creativity. I would hope that agencies and brands continue to keep that lens on entertaining content. That means we're not wasting loads of food. But maybe we will see the end of food stunts. I doubt it.
Yes, I just hope wider teams understand the significance and the broader meaning of the regulations, because I think that's where the real opportunity lies, is getting the buy-in of everyone. Everyone's thinking in terms of healthy, sustainable diets.
I'll probably just add as well, because it comes back to social and PR being together, is that if you can come up with a PR-able idea or activation that is working on social but can also involve sampling, that's the key, really. So it's not a waste of food. You're actually kind of doing three things with one activation. It's the smart thing. But often brands will have a sampling agency, a social agency, and a PR agency. So
there we go. It leads us nicely into the last question, actually. And I wanted to end on a positive note. What food campaign or slogan or positioning in recent times do you really like? And please not one that you've been involved in. Mallika?
The one I saw recently, which I quite liked, was Lidl's Live Well campaigns. It's a little bean and it says Live Well on it. And I have a little locally. I shop there. And I quite like that because, it wasn't preachy. It wasn't sort of too esoteric. It's pretty obvious what it was. They matched those little labels with an interesting expansion in the range. So this is going to make me sound like really foodie now, but there was some very nice tempeh in store, and also marinated tofu, which I would normally have to have found in the shop. So I think doing that, having a catchy slogan, very easy to recognize. I knew what it was. I'd been invited to an event by them where they talked about what it was, what they were doing. I think they're getting it out more to consumers now, and I'm not sure how they're doing that, but I thought it was quite clever because it worked towards the healthy, sustainable diets in a way that felt accessible for the average home cook and shopper.
Great. Harvey?
Probably go with a couple. So one is more known than the other. So M&S is nutrient density play more recently, I think is important. And Dr. Hannah Fraser, if anyone listening can Google and have a look, did a great study recently as part of the Worshipful Company of Fruiters, actually through the Nuffield Scholarship, about looking at the density of fruit and veg back in the 50s versus its nutrient density now. So a carrot in the 50s was better for you than it is now. So nutrient density has been talked about a lot in the past, but M&S have grabbed that and made it kind of consumery, which I think is powerful. The other one is Mossgiel Dairy, which is not very known at all, but they do great organic milk and they're just really simple. It's got this, and this in, and that for me hasn't been greatly sort of reported on or anything, but it's interesting. And then I would have to say Egg's new campaign. I know you said there's not one you've been involved in, but Smart Food, Smart Choice, great campaign.
Good stuff. Well, I feel like we could talk about this for so much longer. I've had a really good time. I feel like I've learned a lot. I hope everyone listening to this has. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but thanks so much to Harvey, Mallika and Evie for taking part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, of course, to everyone for listening too. I'm going to have a vegan donut. So until next time, goodbye.